Welcome. You are at the CCC.
Where there are no outside issues. My name's Anthony. I'm an addict and an alcoholic, a 7th-year doctoral student in clinical psych, another bozo on the bus, and I care about you.
Yes, and I'm LouiLou, and my pronouns are he and him. I am in recovery for crystal meth and alcohol. I am also a former Miss Castro Country Club, and I am in search of balance. Yes, and each week we will provide and create a brave space where we can engage in topics around conversations around topics of recovery.
Our intention is to hold and inspire better spaces for more people in recovery by tackling issues sometimes used to separate us.
Yes, but before you do that, please like, share, tell your friends about this, rate us, and ding that bell.
Ding that bell, ding, 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 ding. And now the disclaimer. The views and thoughts.
Disclaimer.
And now the disclaimer. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on at the CCC are ours alone. We do not represent anyone but ourselves. The material information shared here is for general information purposes only. In other words, we are just friends behind a mic here to entertain you.
Yes, exactly. Wicka, wicka, wicka. Wicka, wicka.
How are you, Lewis?
I'm good. It's like yeah, I'm good. It's been a nice week. But it's interesting how fast the weeks go by. I think it happens as you get older. It's like, especially when you have to work. So how are you?
I'm okay. You know, I've been very exhausted. I've just been very, very tired. I've been firing at all pistons and being very intentional about trying to make some time for myself. Today, after we're done here, excuse me, after we're done here, I'm like contemplating, like, do I go home and finish doing some writing or do I go to the 7:30? So I've just been really busy and I've been really tired and like just trying to take it easy on myself. That's my honest answer.
Absolutely. You know what? I'm in a bit of a renaissance with my recovery.
You and Beyonce.
No, yeah, exactly. I was just talking to a sponsee. My whole sponsee landscape has changed. I just got a new sponsee yesterday. Like this time last month, I had 3 different sponsees, and I'm like, now I have 3 new ones, and I'm like, well, because I'm in a place right now where it's like, you know, I want the work that I've been doing with my sponsor has really kind of been opening me up and changing me and growing me in a way that, you know, is exciting. And I want to do that same work. And unfortunately, not everybody is there or will, you know, have the willingness. And that's okay. But I get to determine for myself, like, do I want to work? I want to work with folks who are working at that, you know, I want to experience that from this end. So there.
You know, that's interesting. You should bring that up because my Al-Anon sponsor called me up this last week. And she was basically asking me if I wanted to recommit because I'd been out of touch and had essentially been MIA for quite a while. And yeah,
I've never heard of you talk about it, Al-Anon.
Yeah, no, I never have. Because I've just been so focused on SLA, and you know, I told her I do want to recommit, and then I was also thinking about my bandwidth and do I really need 3 different 12-step programs? And well, you know, for now, we'll see what that looks like.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so I guess I appreciate that. And at the same time, like I have a sponsee that I need to have that kind of conversation with because, you know, the sponsee dropped their 4th step work like a year ago. I don't see them at meetings. Whenever we talk, it seems like there's some new thing, you know, and I'm like, yeah, I can't. One of my favorite things that a sponsor once told me is like, you know, I can only sponsor you the way I've been sponsored. And if you're not working a program, I don't have a sponsee. I have someone that I talk to, you know.
Exactly.
And that's just like not the nature of the
and
relationship.
I've had to say, it's like, Kamal, and again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's like, Kamal, but we don't have to be sponsor to have a connection. But I had one sponsee that I recently, that we amicably decided that we didn't need to work together because I felt like an acquaintance. And I can't do the work that we're doing with just an acquaintance. There's no way.
Yeah.
It's too sensitive.
Yeah, and this might be a good segue.
Yeah, exactly.
To today's topic.
A
Segue. So today's topic is compartmentalization. So what is compartmentalization and how does it apply to recovery? So compartmentalization refers to separating like our thoughts or our emotions, our behaviors into distinct compartments of our life, right? So one of the ways that I like to think about this is in AA, I've heard a lot of people say you're as sick as your secrets. One of the ways of kind of thinking about being as sick as your secrets is basically how we keep certain parts of our lives hidden from other people, right? And so someone who's in active addiction might compartmentalize by, for example, they have their drinking and they're using and they do all of this stuff behind the scenes, and that's one group of people. And then they go to work and they have this other group of people, and then they're with their friends and their family, and that's another group of people, and no one know, like there isn't none of these kind of like groups or anything, they know anything about each other, and that's because the person keeps those things separate within themselves as well.
I had this group that I drank with, and then I had a group that I did crystal meth with, and it was usually like a balancing act, because I always had my friends like, oh yeah, at the time we didn't necessarily know what you were doing, but we knew at some point, you would find an excuse to kind of leave, and it was a given.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of how I would. It's kind of like, if you want someone to co-sign your bullshit, you'll go to that person who will co-sign your bullshit, right? Absolutely. And so it's like, for example, if you have like, if there are compulsive behaviors that a person has, like for example, if a person is like drinking and using, they're not going to hang out with the people who don't approve of their drinking and using, right? We have the same thing with like, if we're like thinking about process addictions, like if we're talking about sex addiction or if we're talking about food addiction, if you have a food addiction, you're not going to hang out with people who like regularly work out and watch what or if you're sexually compulsive, you're not going to hang out with people who are not okay with like those kind of conversations or behaviors. Ideally, right? Well, well, it would be really uncomfortable, for the people that you're around. But the point is, I think the point of today's episode is to talk about not baby, or maybe it's to talk about, I don't know what's happening. Baby. What song am I? That's so many songs.
Is that the song that's been stuck in your head?
No, it was a song by Salt and Pepper.
Salt and Pepper's here.
What? So okay. What I was saying is like, push it real. Maybe dun, 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 dun. Are we gonna get in trouble for something?
Baby,
baby.
Because we're not doing it.
Compartmentalizing. So compartmentalizing and recovery, or in general, like the purpose of today's conversation is to talk about like what that looks like in recovery or in general, and our experiences with it. Folks, if you're listening at home, as usual, chime in whenever you like.
And I'm glad we're having this conversation, because I think that this idea of compartmentalizing is not a bad thing. When I guess when used or appropriately, or when but like we had started talking about, I had spent so much time putting my life in little boxes, and it's almost like lying so much to so many different people that you don't know what the truth is, and it gets confusing and overwhelming, and it takes a lot of energy.
Okay, so I think that's a nice place to start, because I think when we're talking about compartmentalizing, I think what I'm thinking about that is, I think, maladaptive and unhealthy is the type of compartmentalizing that a person does within themselves. So it's like keeping these parts of ourselves separate from each other because it's somehow because we have things to hide.
Yeah.
I think it's one thing, for example, to say like, I'm going to leave work at home, work at work, and home at home. Exactly. I think that's different. Like, I think that kind of compartmentalizing is healthy.
You notice that every time when people say I'm going to leave work at home and home at home, and they never do.
Yeah.
Brandon, no kidding.
Just as an aside, there's this delicious cheesecake that we have in the room right now.
Oh yeah,
it's sitting by Brandon.
Praline pumpkin cheesecake.
Praline pumpkin cheesecake.
One of my friends made it because he's a pastry chef, and lovely.
It is puro fuego. It is so good. Compartmentalizing. So when we're talking about, so when I'm talking about the kind of, excuse me, the compartmentalizing that I'm talking about that is disruptive is the kind where it's like there's secrets, right?
Yeah.
It's like the segments are being held away from each other, and you know, in the world that's fine, but I'm talking about the stuff that's happening inside. For example, like I feel, yeah, I can talk about like my own behaviors. Like when I was when my sexual behavior was like really compulsive, I tended to be very secretive about it. It was this kind of like very separate thing. And I noticed like I wasn't really integrated. So it wasn't like I was having those conversations with my friends, or like it was something that I was keeping secret. When I was drinking and using, it was like the other thing.
The interesting thing, like with sexual stuff, like I find it's like, even if it's not compulsive or whatever, I think that we all have a tendency to kind of compartmentalize, because the way society kind of views sex sometimes. Yeah. It's like, I'm all, even, I mean, most, of course, folks are not willing, like, it's all taboo to talk about how much we love sex, because, like, having high sex drive is not a bad thing. But if, like, I guess it comes down to, like, why you're doing what you're doing, and if you're using it as a way of escape. But anyway, that was my side.
Yeah. And it always comes back down to like sex or God or something else.
Or Anthony's butt.
It's never about my butt. It's never about my butt. Until you make it about my butt.
Exactly. That I'm here for you.
So, okay. So now I'm thrown off again. Compartmentalizing.
Sorry.
Yeah, so compartmentalizing. You know, going back to this thing about sex just quickly, I had this professor who talked about how you even see the taboos around sex around the language we use, because the language we use around sex, there aren't very many gray areas, right? Like, so for example, it either becomes hyperclinical or it becomes hypersexual. So for example, if I'm going to talk about come, I can say come, or I can say ejaculate, right? There's nothing in the middle, right? Or if we talk about
splooge,
still that's
okay, maybe that's on
or when we talk about, or like we talk about genitals, right? Those go into three different segments. You have clinical, so I could say penis, right? Or I could say clinical, penis or member, or I could say dick or cock, or you could say things like wiener,
hoo-ha, or dilly whopper.
Yeah, you know, like you know what I mean? So there are these like weird things that happen in language, especially around sex. Anyway, but I think, okay, that I think when we're talking about compartmentalizing, that's an interesting example. But I want to talk about what it looked like for us. Like, what did that compartmentalizing look like when you were drinking and using?
Well, like I had said before, it's like at kind of the worst of it, it's like I had certain friends that I hung out with when I did whatever I did, because of whatever shame or anxiety, guilt about what I'm doing. It's like I had my friends that I would go. Well, towards the end, I didn't go to the movies or do much of anything, but I would meet them at the bar, hang out at the bar, and we would only talk about those things. I wouldn't talk about anything else that I'm doing, even though it was quite clear. Like it's always interesting that we think we're hiding something from the people who actually know us. But then I had my friends that I would call it my late night friends, who I did all my dirt with. I didn't have to compartmentalize. I didn't have to keep much from them. But then of course there was the work thing, where it's like, I remember I was working at the Black Coalition on AIDS when I didn't tell them until the end that I had an issue, but I'm sure they knew. But I didn't even talk about drinking. I didn't go out. I didn't do things with them. It was just, this is work over here, you know, so it's all good.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me think about like just how, when I was like trying to keep parts of my life separate, about how much like anxiety and how anxiety inducing and how stressful that was. It makes me think about, for example, like when people are afraid of someone finding out that they're an addict or an alcoholic, even if they're sober, you know, like the kind of secrecy around it, or
afraid of them like I was thinking when you said that, afraid of someone finding out that you're gay.
Right.
And
Yeah, I mean that's interesting because like one of the things that I strive for is to have like to feel fully integrated, to feel like I am a complete person. And so I don't like the idea of having to hide things from myself or other people. So for example, like I remember when we first started doing the podcast, I had some nervousness around it because I was like, in a year I'll be applying for these like psych jobs, and what will like potential employers like, and there's a part of me that's like, I don't care. You know what I mean? Like I don't like, just as an aside, like we spend more time at work than we do doing anything else. Like more than half of our lives are spent at work,
exactly.
And I don't know that I can voluntarily put myself in a situation where I am asked to somehow sacrifice like an authentic personality or an authentic showing up. But and that was, and a big part of that is because like I'm getting older and I have so much, I have a lot less energy to do that kind of stuff, to hide for anyone.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's what reminds me of it. It reminds me of like the difference between like the kind of the effort that I had to put into hiding all the time when I was drinking and using. And I think about like what hiding looks like now as a sober person. Like I just gave a professional example, but I think another example of that would be, you see people who, this is probably maybe not the best example, but I think about like people when they share at meetings and it feels like a performance.
Oh yeah.
Like it feels like there's this fear that if I am myself, this group of people won't like me, or yeah, I mean, it's almost like compartmentalizing to me feels like another way of saying hiding. What were like some of the like reasons why, like what were some of the, I guess, positive benefits that you received from kind of separating your life?
What do you mean, the positive?
Yeah, because I mean, we did. I mean, I have some ideas. So
I think
yeah.
it was, while I was in my active addiction, I would think I was people pleasing, and I think that it's easier for those around you who probably can't handle it to not hear about it, And so I mean, because that's a lot when you hear some like if I go to you and I tell you I got a problem, I'm a fucking mess, and you can't handle that, or you are not a person that can handle that. I think that the alternative, what I was doing, was not sharing, so it was out of sight, out of mind. Even though we knew something might be going on, we don't have to address it because Lewis is not talking about it. So I think the positive may have been in my delusion, thinking that I'm actually running a scam that you don't know. And the positive is for those people who maybe probably wouldn't be able to handle it if they knew what was really going on.
Yeah, I think that's my experience too, where for me, the compartmentalizing, let's you maybe reduce it down to something simpler. Like the separating my life in that way, I think did provide some like temporary relief. It's like, I don't have to deal with this. If you don't see all of me, or if I keep this hidden from you, I don't need to deal with like the consequence of what like your reaction might be. We have a comment. There is a comment. Jonathan writes, "Hi, Jonathan. I find it hard to practice these principles in all of my affairs when I compartmentalize. I've learned I have to bring my full self with me everywhere I am." Oh, I love that, Jonathan.
I love that.
Is that who I think it is?
I know. I was looking at
oh my God. Hey, good to see you.
I know. Are you in Spain?
No, he's on the East Coast. He's wrapping up a
I know,
program.
but he's always traveling.
He is always traveling. Anyway, good to see you. And I love this idea of like being able to practice the principles in all of our affairs.
I know, and it's like you're saying, you wanting to integrate, because I think that is definitely something that you work for. But I think that when you're not there, that's the struggle.
Yeah. Well, I think about, gosh, like the many ways, I am trying really hard these days not to be judgmental. And I notice that when I'm exhausted, it's really hard for me to practice the principles in all of my affairs because I feel so drained. But I'm thinking of people who come into the rooms and, like there's this way that they come into the rooms and they kind of try to bring the bar with them.
Oh yeah, no. I was talking to somebody else about, you know what? Was it you? It's like I heard somebody maybe I was listening to one of our past episodes, and they bring that they're talking about that bar mentality, and it happened. Yeah, no, I understand.
Yeah, it's this kind of, you were actually talking about it in that, you didn't say this, but you were in that other in that interview that you just did recently, you were talking about um the cattiness that comes like with like drag personas, that's common, and you were talking about like the boundaries around that, about um where the goal is not to hurt, and the goal is to bring people into the fun with you. And so what I've noticed with people who kind of try to bring the bar into the rooms, and I do think this is about compartmentalizing, is that because they're afraid of, well, on one end, it might be that a person might not know themselves, or they're trying to figure themselves out. And it's easier to default to what they believe is their personality when it's actually not. It's like this thing that people, excuse me, it's this thing that people develop. I, I don't know. And by develop, I mean like, because it's the same across the board. You always know when you see it. It's like the same kind of personality trait. It's like someone being mean and making like caustic jokes, and like, and there's this kind of like exclusivity, this like air of exclusivity to them, and it's really tiring to be around. But there was a time,
absolutely.
Yeah, but there was a time when like that made a lot of sense, and that to me is an example of like the type of hiding.
It's a shield. It's kind of armor.
Yeah.
The speaker on Friday on Sunday night had shared she struggled with the idea of saying that she was an alcoholic for the longest time. And while you were saying that kind of attitude, that bar thing that you bring in, I think that it's a lot for people to finally get to that first step kind of feeling where you say, "Oh, I am an alcoholic." No matter what. I mean, I think a lot of times we'll see folks come in and they're guarded, and they're not letting it down, and I try to, and I agree, I'm with you. It's like I see it, and I try to just get to a place where I'm all, you know what, they have a higher power. Whatever process they're going through, I don't have to necessarily be the person to see them through it, because maybe I don't have it for them. But and I'm going to say this again. This is our Bonnie Violet moment. Give yourself the grace. Like, I think that I would like to not be critical. I would not to like be this, that, whatever. But it's a process that I go through. I don't just say one day that I don't want to do it. I start to do the things, and then eventually, like, um, because of the work that we're doing, it's like it becomes easier not to be. But until such time, being aware of when you're doing it and pulling me aside, because I'm always down to do it with you. Surrounding yourself with people who know that you're trying to be a better version of yourself. That is important. That was some of the best advice I got. Surround yourself with people, be mindful about how you are around certain people, so that, yeah.
I think one of the consequences, or one of the worst things that happens when a person is so busy separating themselves into all these different pieces, is that slowly what ends up happening is that they become numb and detached, and there's no sense of self, because whatever that sense of self was has been kind of like parceled off into all of these different pieces,
Absolutely.
And yeah, that's certainly, like, that was my experience when, before I got sober. I can just remember, like, I was constantly adapting to the people around me. I was constantly becoming what I thought people needed me to be. And as a result of that, I had no idea who the hell I was. I didn't really know what my values were, because I was so busy piecing myself into all of these different things, right? And so as I got sober, these things started to integrate, and the way they started to integrate is when I started to figure out, what are my values, what are the things that make me happy, when do I feel comfortable, what are the things that I'm afraid of, what are the things that make me feel tender, and as I became more familiar and more honest about those things, I started to feel more whole. I felt like I could start to have a fuller human experience, because I wasn't so busy trying to entertain everyone.
I was thinking, all that time you're spending being dishonest, even if you don't see it as being dishonest or whatever, what it was doing was it was really chipping away. I used to say my drug experience, it was chipping away at me, my soul. It was taking away from my self-esteem slowly, and I felt I was feeling more and more worthless because I'm not a sociopath, thank God. And I was lying to the people that I care about, that I say I care about. And I was being dishonest. I was sneaking around, and that can't feel good for anybody.
No, I can't. And I think in the long term, it just delays the inevitable. I'm a firm believer that, you know, we're going to get to where we're going. Always, we're either going to get there kicking and screaming, or we're going to get there the easier, softer way. You know, and I think when I'm fighting myself, I'm really just kind of delaying the inevitable. You know, one of the, you know, I'm filled with platitudes today, but like one of the other things I've heard before is like change before you have to. You know, like the change, if there's some change that you need to make, life is either going to propel you into that direction, or you're going to voluntarily get there on your own. And I think that's what happens with a lot of people when they come into the room. Sometimes, you know, they're here because of court order.
Oh yeah.
Or they're here because, you know, they were sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that's,
I'm sorry. It's like
it's okay. Yeah, I was really distracted.
No,
I was trying to bring myself.
No, a friend of mine who's visiting from New York was asking about dinner on Saturday, and
that couldn't wait.
No, but I think they're making reservations, and I gave a heart.
Do they know you're on a podcast?
I just said I'm on the podcast right now. You know. Yeah,
excuse me. That could have waited.
It probably could have. You know.
It probably would have. It's fine.
I was trying that. Like, okay, so in any other situation, I mean, it
would have been fine.
I do have to respect or appreciate this, but Anthony definitely is sensitive to this, you know, and so I'm
a squirrel.
I know, exactly. Squirrel.
Oh wait, I'm not a squirrel. You know what I meant to say. Yeah,
exactly.
I remember there was this one time I was sharing at a meeting, and you know, like people do things in meetings. I was sharing at a meeting, and this girl, she had a dog, and the dog was like all over the place. And at some point, I was just staring because I couldn't get my brain to stop. And then I just stopped. I think you may have been at this meeting. Were you at that meeting? I just stopped, and I was just looking at the dog, and I like had to snap out of it. And then I go, I'm sorry, your dog's distracting me. You know, I can't help it.
Kyla, it would have been nice if you wrapped it up and said, and you need to leave.
Well, she ended up leaving.
Yeah. Now that I respect, because like, you know how they include that in the script sometimes if your dog's an interruption.
Yeah.
And there are some folks who, and bless dog people, but sometimes they're completely in their own world.
Yeah.
Like my dog can do no wrong, even though your dog just pooped right here.
Well, I think, and then we can come back to this. I think that there are actually very few dogs in San Francisco that are well trained.
Oh yeah, I know.
I feel like the majority of dogs that I see, they're like walking their owners.
Oh gosh, yes.
You see that
the
a lot here.
Dog will pull into the store even though the owners, and they say, "Oh, you want to go in there? Oh, okay. What is your dog going in to buy something?" I'm a hello, snap out of it. I always say that, you know what? Either you or the alpha, or your dog's the alpha, and it looks like your dog's the alpha.
Yeah, my partner and I were talking about how we were talking about this the other day. It's part of a longer story, but basically we were talking about how like dogs want leadership. Like dogs they want to be guided.
They're kids. They want structure.
Yeah, they want structure. Okay, compartmentalizing. Okay. So one of the biggest downsides in my lived experience, and I think just maybe universally, is that one of the downsides of compartmentalizing or keeping secrets, especially when it comes to recovery, is that it's delaying getting better. You know, it's delaying someone from getting the help that they need. It's delaying someone. It's prolonging pain. You know, you know that to me that's also really tricky, because when, you know, another shout out to Bonnie Violet. She said this. I think it was last year, maybe it was a couple years. You know, we've been doing this for a few years now.
Yeah, I know. I'm with you.
Yeah, we've been so it might have been a year or so ago, but she was saying, that a person may not have they may not have like the self-awareness to know that they don't have the self-awareness. You know what I mean? Not her words, but
No,
it
but
was
that's
like
true.
something along those lines. Yeah. And so
They're not woke.
they're not.
They're asleep.
You heard it here.
Yeah.
But and so I am sensitive to that. And at the same time, I do think that I don't know. Maybe I've lived in San Francisco for too long because there's this part of me that's like, well, like some people they're just so sick they can't see it, or they've lost the capacity to and to have the willingness, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, are we? I don't know. I do. Are there people that are constitutionally incapable with being honest with themselves? I mean, probably.
Yeah,
I think those people are actually few and far between.
I like to be hopeful. I like to think that maybe in this moment now they are unable, but given some time and a thoughtful kind of like shove in the right direction.
Right. And so, how did you start to feel more integrated?
I think it's okay. So letting go of the drugs and alcohol and getting to a place, and this was after going through the steps, because I do 12 steps a number of times, and then having a relationship with a sponsor and people around me where I was able to start telling the truth, because I struggled in the beginning coming in. I thought people didn't want me around. I didn't feel like I had any value. And I think the more that I did the work, the more that I showed up, the more that I followed through on things, the more that I finished things that I started, all of those things helped me to kind of get to a place where I'm all, oh yeah, you're good. You're not, this was just what it was. It was an experience. You weren't a bad person, because I didn't come here to be a good person. I come here to learn how to live, without drugs and alcohol. And it's been a process. I feel like you said, it's my lived experience. It's been a process, but I had to get to a place where I could trust when people said they wanted me to keep coming back. And the more it's like all the things were together. It's like, the more like I put it out there that this is who I was, and like in some ways I'm a little more unapologetically who I am, authentic as much as I can be. But leading up to, like, I think, like I was saying earlier, I found folks, my tribe, people that I could laugh with and I could be cool with, who it turns out they had some of the same challenges, and we laughed about it. We talked about it, and we talked about it in a way, and we normalized, like, oh, this is not bad. It's not bad that I only have 35 cents in my pocket and I don't have any money, or I paid all my bills and I'm this, that, or that I'm not going on trips all the time. All those things. Uh, I don't have to hide this from anybody. I don't have to hide that I experienced alcoholism, that I experienced addiction, that I did some of the things, that sharing at fucking meetings, and having people around me laugh and get it, and then come up to you after and say, I understand. It was all of these things, and it still continues to be things that, because there are some areas that I always say, and I'll pass it to you.
You can keep talking. It's fine.
Okay, so I still do that thing where if there's something that I become aware of, I keep it in my head, and I tell my sponsors, I keep it in my head until I process it. I think my sponsor is probably the one person who will always get. I'll talk to you about it. I've gotten better with this, but I'll keep it in my head, process it out, so that when I share it with somebody, I'm not asking for you to hold it in confidence. Like, that's my thing. It's like, I am not sharing secrets with people. I always say, I'm not putting that pressure on anybody else to hold that confidence for something that I value. It's like, it's mine. I'm gonna work through it. And then when I work through it, and so I think that was something too that probably helped. That it's like, come on, I am gonna just address it when it comes up, because shit comes up and it comes up all the time. Anyway, like today, what I was sharing with you.
I thank you for that. Yeah. I think the first thing that comes up for me is I feel like I had to just drop the act. I hid behind so many God, I was so, I mean, looking back, and I say this compassionately and with love, but I was just so obnoxious. I remember when before I got sober, there were like all these different identities that I tried to hide behind. Like there was one part of me that I saw myself as like an academic, and that was like how I hid behind that, like I felt like I always had to know the right answer, and that I had to be rational, and I had to be like, it was this weird thing that I felt like I was putting on. And I think I shared this with you before, and like I felt like I like worked so hard to appear like clean cut and proper and like just so contained. And I remember, do you remember Rocco?
Yes.
So there was this one time, I think I was in my first 30 days, and I was like so busy doing the song and dance. And there was this one time, Rocco, who like I'd only had so many interactions with him, he looked at me and he goes, "I don't think any of this is real."
That sounds like Rocco.
Yeah, he goes, "I don't think I don't think any of this is you." And I remember thinking to myself, "Fuck you, you fucking gargoyle." But then at the same time, I'm like, I think he, like, I felt like he saw through it, you know?
Yeah, but you always have, like, for anyone, it's like, make sure that you're the person that they can hear when you,
Yeah, I
when
mean,
you offer that up.
looking back at that, I don't know that that was very helpful for
No,
me
not
at
at
all.
all.
Like, if anything, it made me resent, like,
Uh-huh.
yeah, it made me really resentful, and it was really hard for me to hear that. And like, although he may have been seeing something that I wasn't able to see in myself yet,
Yeah, but it's like until you're ready. Authenticity is interesting because it's like, how we're talking about compartmentalizing. That was who I was, and that was my authentic self in that moment.
Yeah,
That's how I was there.
yeah. I
And
mean, it's safety.
yeah, it's safety.
It's safety. I was actually
The best that I could do.
Yeah, I was talking about this yesterday about how, you can see someone, like, for example, I think it's problematic, and we were talking about this yesterday too. It's problematic, for example, to reduce someone's behavior and say, "Oh, that's just typical addict behavior. That's typical alcoholic behavior," because it's so nuanced. You know what I mean? Like, what are we really saying? What we're really saying is like, when we say that, I think what we're really saying is like, we're looking at someone and we're saying, "Oh, this person, I know what it's like to feel fearful. And when I've been fearful, I've looked and sounded this way." That's very different from like just reducing someone's behavior. um and so going back to I think the changes that I've made, I think a big part of that was like I had to drop the act. And I think I started to drop the act when I was in spaces where I felt safe and I was talking to people that made me feel like loved and cared for. And when I was in those situations, that's when I was able to relax a little bit.
Yeah.
And then, to your earlier point about, like sharing at meetings and people saying like, "Hey, I related to that." I think part of that is like the vulnerability and like the honesty that, that we have to, not have to, that I've had to really give myself to, avail myself to, in order to get to where I am today, which is I feel integrated today.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I can be like a more dynamic person in one body as opposed to trying to split myself between communities. What were you going to say?
I was going to say the fifth step with someone that, like, if you have this relationship with this, especially your first sponsor, like I, like, we sometimes we put them in an unhealthy way on a pedestal because it's the first person for a lot of people that you've been able to have an intimate relationship like this, and then they hear all the things that you did because you felt safe enough to share it with, and then they don't turn away from you.
Right.
And it was in that all of a sudden it's like I talk about that being a spiritual awakening. It was a place where I'm like, oh, like when I heard somebody say it's like, if it has a name for it, that means it's already been done. That was freeing. That was so freeing because it's like oh yeah, I didn't create it because it would have, and even if I did, that would have been cool.
Yeah, my favorite comedian, she has a bit where she talks about, her name's Maria Banford. She's amazing. If you've never heard of her, check her out.
Sounds familiar.
Maria Banford, she's brilliant. Yeah, she's absolutely, but she talks about exactly that, about like if you have like shame or like depression around something, like Google it, someone's done it already.
Exactly.
Um but to this point about like it feeling more integrated, I think, that's really taken some time. I think part of what's taken time is, I, I, it's taken a lot for me. I've been in therapy all my life. I have sponsors, I have sponsees, I have a psychiatrist. You know what I mean? Like it really has taken all of those things for me to feel more integrated. And part of that is like, there is trauma in my background, there is addiction in my background, and it takes what it takes. But I feel like the thing that made addressing those issues possible is when, and one, I slowed down, and then two, I was like, I had to admit to myself, like, this shit is not working.
Yeah.
And this shit is not working.
That's step one. Step one. The gig is up.
Yeah, the gig is up. It's like, and when we say, and that's why we say, we practice these principles in all of our fairs. It's like step one is like, yeah, I admitted I was powerless and my life had become unmanageable. And that isn't just with drinking and using. It was literally the way I was like conceiving of my life. All of that was unmanageable. You try splitting your life up into a bunch of different sections, and then you're like not able to keep it straight. That's unmanageable. If it's leading to depression and anxiety, that's unmanageable. And yeah, and so I had to get honest, and I had to allow myself to be vulnerable. And the last thing I'll say about this is, one of the hardest things I think about recovery for me has been finding my community or finding my tribe. But maybe like a more accurate statement would be, it has been figuring out what it is that I need in order to feel comfortable.
Absolutely.
Because for the longest time, like even as a sober person, I would put myself in these situations where I'm like, why do I feel like shit when I'm around these people? And I would think it was me. And I'm like, no, actually, maybe these are just not the people, like these are just people I shouldn't fuck with.
Yeah.
Psychic vampires or like just people who have like ways, like values or ideas of the world that like they don't vibe with me. And like, no tea, no shade to those people.
It's interesting because it's like they help you to get to a place where you figure that out, and then you got to let them go. Because it's like, tribes are amazing. Tribes are amazing because they give you that safeness, that safe space to explore who you are. And when you figure out who you are, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I don't like you.
Yeah,
and it's understandable. I am always like impressed when sponsees, like in sponsor relationship, when a person gets to the point where they find they need something different. And it's amazing when and if they can just do it without, because it used to be that they would just ghost, but now it's like, I think I'm going to do something different, and that's okay. That's our prerogative.
Yeah, it's my prerogative.
Dun, 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 dun.
I'll do what I want to do. It's my prerogative. So the other thing I was thinking of, wait, well, hold on. It's not even time. Hold on. So Brandon has this passive aggressive way of getting us to shut up. And what he does is he throws up.
He throws up his gang signs.
Gang signs. He throws up. So for if you're listening and you don't see us live, he throws up these text bubbles that we have to read toward the end, and he'll throw it up when they're as a way to tell us to shut up and read it. But hold on, there was one other thing I wanted to say before we read this. I forgot what it was. It's not our prerogative. What were you talking about? What was the last thing you said? Do what I want to do.
Oh my God, it's like now I forgot.
You were talking about people telling the truth, vulnerable. Oh God,
I forgot. We'll continue the conversation.
God damn it. Well,
so the Castro Country Club is a safe and sober community center for all people and a refuge for the LGBTQ recovery community.
We provide programs and services that help people change their lives by supporting personal growth.
Our vision is to reduce the suffering of addiction by connecting people to community, opportunity, and support.
You can find more information, including all the ways to contact us, at www.castrocountryclub.org/podcast.
Yes, and tune in every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Pacific Standard Time, when we go live on our Castro Country Club Facebook and YouTube channels.
Find us wherever you listen to podcasts.
Absolutely.